Hello, this is Matt Caddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy with the American Kratom Association, and welcome to this special episode of End Kratom Misinformation. For those who follow some of the anti-kratom advocacy posts on social media, one that caught my eye was a post made by Dean Francis, who, as many of you know, is the self-appointed head of a new anti-kratom group, End Kratom Addiction, where he posted his latest hyperbolic prediction to the end of the kratom industry and the devastation of the consumer advocacy group, the American Kratom Association. Here's Mr. Francis's latest doomsday prediction for kratom consumers. Quote, super bad news for the kratom industry today. Can't wait to share it on Monday. It's a really bad time for the American Kratom Association. Unquote. And then get this ending. Quote, it's only the beginning of a tidal wave of truth coming, unquote. This isn't the first kind of over-the-top attack on kratom consumers launched by Mr. Francis. Personally, it reminds me of the ragtag carnival operations that would land in town for a couple of days, and they always had a sideshow barker standing outside of a tent, loudly trying to attract crowds with exaggerated pitches and sensational claims. Step right up. See the world's only man with two noses. Only one dime. Well, like the carnival hucksters, Dean Francis is asking us to step into the shadows of his anti-kratom tent to see the man with two noses. And I think what he's promoting is his new friend Andrew Kolodny and his just published anti-kratom commentary in the Addiction Journal. If that's the sensational doomsday for the kratom community, with Dean Francis barking like a carnival huckster for us to see the man with two noses, the reality is, as it's always been, it's all fake. And Andrew Kolodny's anti-kratom commentary would even make Pinocchio blush for having the longest single nose. This is about Kolodny's latest commentary. It's entitled, Here We Go Again, Kratom and the Failure to Learn from the Opioid Crisis. That commentary reads less like a scientific analysis and more like a familiar attempt to force kratom into a predetermined narrative. The timing for the publication of this commentary could not be worse for Kolodny and Dean Francis. Kolodny, whom some advocates in the pain patient community claims to have the opinion that he is just a mercenary for hire for the Suboxone industry, and he now appears to be looking for a new consulting and expert witness gig, given that opioid litigation is largely drying up. The evidence shows Dr. Kolodny was a highly controversial player in the attack on pain patients' access to needed opioid medications when the self-created crisis was at its peak. What Kolodny and his carnival barker Dean Francis completely ignore while ginning up their latest breathtaking predictions on the demise of the kratom community was that Kolodny's so-called commentary in the Addiction Journal got big-footed by the announcement made by the National Institutes of Health when they authorized and funded a human clinical trial examining purified kratom alkaloids as a potential tool in treating opioid use disorder. To be fair to Andrew Kolodny, and fairness is not a term that Dean Francis or Kolodny are likely to be familiar with, you have to submit any personal commentary to publications like the Addiction Journal weeks in advance of the publication. Then you have to take the risk that intervening events can leave you looking like that man with two noses, that those that paid the 10 cents then clearly see to be only a huckster scam. For NIH, the decision to embark on this study was not made casually. There have been numerous peer-reviewed published research articles pointing to the growing evidence that opioid addicts are able to use kratom to wean off of dangerously addictive and potentially deadly opioids. Kolodny dismisses such notions out of hand because he is now the self-styled expert on all things kratom, and he has joined forces with Dean Francis, Wendy Chamberlain, who is the founder of the anti-kratom advocacy group, Kratom Danger Awareness, and Patty Wheeler, who used her Hollywood connections to produce a documentary about the tragic death of her son, whom she believes died because of kratom. But after more than $100 million of our tax money invested in kratom research by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, NIH is relying on scientific evidence in announcing the NIH-funded human clinical trial on the potential benefits kratom can offer for opioid addicts, not just the opinions of this loosely formed Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, Wheeler troubadour troupe pushing their over-the-top anti-kratom messages. If kratom presents the kind of extraordinary risk Kolodny hypothesizes about with the descriptions of widespread addiction, overdose, and severe public health harms, how did an NIH-funded study receive approval to administer kratom-derived compounds to human subjects suffering from opioid use disorder? The answer is straightforward. The scientific evidence is far more advanced than Kolodny wants to admit. Here is the inconvenient truth that Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, and Wheeler do not want to hear. Before human subjects can be enrolled in any study, an independent institutional review board must determine that participants will not be exposed to unreasonable safety risks. That reality creates an obvious problem for Kolodny's central argument. Throughout his commentary, Kolodny relies heavily on former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb's 2018 declaration that kratom is an opioid. What Kolodny fails to mention is the federal government's own scientific leadership team subsequently rejected the effort to schedule kratom. Former Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Brett Chouat, reviewed all of the evidence underlying the Gottlieb kratom scheduling recommendation and described it as, quote, embarrassingly poor evidence and data and a failure to consider the overall public health, unquote. The recommendation for kratom scheduling was withdrawn. It was not a private discussion. It played out in real time on a Twitter exchange between Gottlieb and Dr. Chouat. That omission is not a minor oversight by Kolodny. It is central to the understanding of the federal government's evolving position on kratom based on science. Kolodny also ignores the growing body of evidence showing that natural kratom leaf products and highly concentrated, chemically manipulated 7-OH opioids are not the same thing. The FDA's own human dose finding study found that kratom appears to be well tolerated across all tested dose levels, with no serious adverse events reported. NIDA has repeatedly acknowledged that deaths involving kratom are rare and frequently involved when they do occur with multiple substances, underlying health conditions, or product adulterations. One of the bit players in the Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, Wheeler sideshow on kratom is Utah State Senator Mike McKell, who boldly tried to discredit the FDA dose finding study on kratom by telling his colleagues in the Utah legislature they could dismiss the results of that study, showing that kratom is well tolerated and safe for consumer use, even at extraordinarily high levels, because that study was funded by the kratom industry. That is untrue. And Senator McKell refused to correct that lie, even when he was told and knew it was untrue. He has two noses, or a long Pinocchio nose, too. It is adulterated kratom products that are the real problem. Yet Kolodny and his troubadour troupe casually dismisses concerns about chemically manipulated 7-hydroxymetrogenine opioids by claiming the rising harms predate their recent appearance, claiming these products did not arrive on the market until mid-2025. New evidence, admitted even by the 7-OH manufacturers themselves, is that they were marketing their chemically manipulated 7-OH opioids years earlier, but they simply deceived consumers by calling it natural kratom. And now it appears they've deceived the scientists who relied upon that mid-2025 entry date in looking at the adverse events that were reported and mislabeled and mischaracterized as natural kratom. But the central question is not whether adverse events existed before the emergence of these high-potency, chemically manipulated 7-OH opioid products. The question is whether policymakers should distinguish between natural kratom leaf products and these chemically manipulated substances that are specifically engineered to produce stronger opioid-like effects. Federal health authorities already have. In 2025, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and then FDA Commissioner Marty Makary recommended Schedule I controls for chemically manipulated 7-OH opioid products, while simultaneously emphasizing that the FDA was not focused on properly manufactured natural kratom leaf products. Kolodny's commentary attempts to erase that distinction. Kolodny is joined by the latest anti-kratom campaign, and it looks like Dean Francis' social media post that was publicly teasing what appears to be the Kolodny article as open quote, super bad news, unquote, for the kratom community, is on the same thin ice for credibility as Wendy Chamberlain of Kratom Danger Awareness and Patty Wheeler, who have similarly promoted narratives blaming natural kratom leaf products for tragedies that remain the subject of substantial scientific and factual dispute. And Dean Francis's own claims that his son was pushed into expensive drug rehab programs because of natural leaf kratom is still completely unproven. And Dean has refused multiple invitations to join me in a public forum to present his evidence. Here is the plain fact. The latest Dean Francis post and Andrew Kolodny's audition to be the new anti-kratom naysayer just got big-footed by NIH and the real science. After years of predictions that kratom would inevitably be scheduled, banned, or exposed as the next opioid epidemic, the facts keep moving in the opposite direction. This new human clinical trial has been authorized to examine whether kratom-derived compounds can help address opioid addiction itself, is a huge move forward in research. None of this means that kratom is risk-free. No biologically active substance is. But what it does mean is that Kolodny's simplistic comparisons of kratom to OxyContin and the prescription opioid crisis are scientifically unsound, like the man with two noses was. The real lesson of the opioid crisis is not that every substance interacting with opioid receptors should be banned. If that were true, numerous approved medications and naturally occurring compounds would face the same treatment. The actual lesson is that public policy should be guided by evidence rather than ideology or the opinions of people like Andrew Kolodny. But unfortunately, Kolodny's commentary demonstrates that some critics of kratom have still not learned that lesson. On Monday, the commentary will remain what it was when it was submitted, an opinion piece built on selective evidence, outdated talking points, and an utter refusal to acknowledge the rapidly changing scientific landscape surrounding the truth about kratom. The science moved forward. Andrew Kolodny's argument has not. I'll stand by with great interest to see what Dean Francis made up big hyperbolic claim about the kratom's demise on Monday. I think he just got slammed with this latest announcement. Thank you, and stay tuned for future episodes of End Kratom Misinformation. We appreciate your joining us on this journey to find the truth.